about suspense. If Mr. Bach and I have done our jobs here, you should be feeling a little bit right now, and I'd like to look at exactly why. First, underneath all the musical pyrotechnics of this passage, there is a simple, straightforward chord progression. It runs like this. And you don't have to know anything about harmonic theory to understand that you know where this is going to go. You know more or less where this is going to go. You know it's either going to end on the minor rather, or much more likely it's going to end on the major. And you can be fairly confident it's not going to do this. In the same way, one of the hallmarks of good suspense is giving your readers enough information that they can anticipate that something's coming, but not so much information that they're certain of what it's going to be. They can see the shape of the story as it's unfolding, but they're not sure exactly what's going to fill that shape. In the beginning of Salem's Lot, Stephen King starts with a prologue in which two unnamed characters, a man and a boy, travel from the small town of Salem's Lot, Maine, all the way to Mexico to get away from some horror. You don't know who the characters are. You can kind of guess that the man is Ben Mears because both the man and Ben are writers and both of them drive Citroëns, which is a fairly rare car even back then. You have no idea who the boy is. You have no idea what the horror was. But you know that it was bad enough that they had to cross an entire continent to get away from it, and the boy still cannot speak of it. So you go into the main story with a sense that something bad is going to happen, although arguably you could have gotten that sense just from Stephen King's name on the cover. Something else to note about this chord sequence is that it seems to resolve at times. There are places where you could call it finished. That's a resolution. That's a resolution. But every time it seems to resolve, Bach comes back and pushes it a little further, introduces new strange harmonics that take it further away from the initial A minor that you started out. In the same way, Stephen King starts off Salem's Lot with a simple, small New England town, as only Stephen King can create them. Ben Mears arrives in the town where he lived for a few years as a boy, and it's full of eccentric characters, and it's full of an interesting history, and it's not exactly Mayberry RFD, but it's not a bad place to live. The people have flaws, but on the whole, they're good people. Then readers discover that when he was a boy, Ben Mears had a horrifying experience in an abandoned mansion at the center of town, the Marsden House, where someone had committed suicide in the 30s. You don't know if the experience he had was real, you don't know if it's a hallucination. The story continues, Ben develops a love interest, you meet more of the interesting people in town, and then a couple of macabre strangers come to town and buy the Marsden House. And then a young boy disappears. And then readers learn that the man who committed suicide in the Marsden House wasn't just a retired oil executive, as everyone thought. He was a hitman for the Boston mob. Then they discover that he may not have just been a hitman, he may have been a serial child molester who was responsible for several children's disappearances. Then the older brother of the boy who disappeared comes down with a strange illness and dies. And then the gravekeeper, who is burying his body, starts singing an old hymn, and without his realizing it, in between lines of the old hymn, he starts introducing lines from the Black Mass. And you understand, this is still less than halfway through the book. But over and over, readers think they know what the story is. They think they know what's happening. And then Stephen King introduces something else that pushes them further and further away from their original conception. The final thing to notice about this chord sequence, and again, you don't need to understand harmonic theory, you can just hear it. Each step in the sequence arises from what came before it. It's a natural progression from one chord to another. And in the same way, as you're pushing your readers further and further into your suspense, each step has to feel natural. It has to feel like it arose out of things that were already part of the story. So if you are revising your manuscript and you find that you have a slack passage and you decide that you need a little more tension, so you're going to add another element, pump your brakes. Go back to the beginning of the manuscript, read it through from the beginning with this new element in mind, make sure it fits in as part of the world you're creating. Because I think that's what Stephen King did. From the very beginning, Stephen King knew what had actually happened in the Marsden house. He knew what it meant. And as he is pushing readers further and further into the suspense, it's not so much that he is giving them new information, it's not so much that he is adding things to the story, he is revealing things that are already there, that he has already worked out in considerable detail. And I think that's the key to keeping your suspense natural. Because if ever your readers feel that you're manipulating them, if ever they feel that you're just adding something just for the sake of giving them suspense, you're going to lose them entirely. It has to feel real. Suspense comes with the suspension of disbelief. I've taken you to the edge of this chord sequence 3 or 4 times now, so let's take it all the way through and hear how it finally resolves. Next month, we'll talk about surprise.